Go. Hi all, good evening. So here is the podcast between me, More Hanspal, and my friend Sarthak Notyal. So just to give you a disclaimer before we just start with this podcast, all the discussion today is just for information purpose and just for the knowledgeable purpose. Any kind of stocks, if you tend to name, are just for example purpose and just to help you understand the concept related to that. Here we aren't recommending any kind of stock, and all the kind of discussion is just for information purpose and just to help our audience enhance their conceptual knowledge about financial modeling and valuation. So that is our agenda for today. So before we begin with our Q&A that we guys have planned for each other, I'll just introduce myself and then my friend Sarthak can just introduce himself. So guys, my name is Maurya Hanspal. I'm currently working at JP Morgan Chase and Company in the asset management division. Apart from that, I'm running my own investment banking training programs from past 3 years, where I've trained people on financial modeling, valuations, scientific analysis, portfolio management to more than 15,000 plus students. I recently wrote my own book that is Driving to the Rule Book of an Investor, which talks about fundamental and technical analysis and various concepts on valuations, and also been a keynote speaker for these aspects in different colleges like IIMs, IITs, NRC Monji, KG from India, to name a few. So, hey, my friend Sarthak, just go ahead.
Hey, hello, man. Thanks for this opportunity you have given me. So, hi guys, I'm Sarthak Nautiyal. I'm from Uttarakhand basically. I have completed my college from Delhi only. It's GEMS Rohini. Uh, After that, I have started working with Get Me Research. So, Get Me Research, it was a hedge fund. I was working for a hedge fund of USA. I was making financial models for US listed companies. After that, currently I am employed with India Bridge Capital Management. So we have a asset under management of 400 crores, which we have completely invested in the Indian small caps. Yeah, so that's about myself.
Okay, that's really great. That's really great. So, I have a couple of questions for you, right? To set the tone.
Sure. Sure.
Yeah. So, my first question to you is that what are the key parameters that you look into while investing into a particular stock and market?
See, Mayur, so if we want to invest in any company, if we are targeting, so let's say we want to select any company. So what we used to do is we used to select some theme. We can take an example like currently we can see that PSU stocks can be give a good rally because if BJP comes into power, it might come into power. So PSU stocks can give a good rally. So we select some theme, some kind of themes. Other than that, what we used to do is, as per the financial perspective, we used to see what are the sales growth of the company. Is the company is going giving good sales growth? Is the company is maintaining the margins? We used to compare the company's margins with the peer companies. The main thing we used to do is we used to see some kind of moat of that company. There must be some moat. Like I can give you an example of Asian Paint. Right, it's just an example. So Asian Paints have a moat of a production modes. They have a lot of production mills. They have a lot of capacity, which is not possible for any company to just come into that business and start making such huge amount of paints. Right. So this is one example. Then we see the ROCE of the company, whether the company is earning good amount of profits or not. And we see the ROIC. So there are certain things. I just want to add one more thing which we used to see is about who is running the business. Let's say a technical term for that could be a corporate governance analysis, which we used to do is. So the main reason for doing that is the person who is running the business must be well qualified for running that, right? Let's say any company which is run by a specialty chemical company is run by a person who have did a degree in design. That won't make any sense, right? So we used to check that whether the promoter is well qualified or not. So yeah, these are a certain kind of points we used to see. Also used to see how is the sales is going to grow in the future. How we can see like what are the government initiatives, or maybe is there any tailwinds or headwind for the industry or not. Also we used to forecast the sales of that company or the profits of that company to see the future of that. Yeah.
That's a great answer. I really believe our audience will get assistance like when they are trying to value a company or trying to read the financials of any particular company. Yeah, thank you for
Right.
that.
Right. So, Mayur, I just want to ask you something about. on expanding this question only, that how can we forecast the revenue number when the management have not given any guideline? Like we used to see the guidelines of the management used to forecast the number, but what if the management have not given any guidelines?
Yeah, so that's a tricky one. First question being the tricky one. Of course, yes. So like when we have the management guidelines, right, or we have the numbers being discussed by the management, their future guidance, it's easier to forecast the future revenues for the company. But when we do not have that, in that scenario, what most of the people are doing in the market, which is not an ideal approach, which I believe is taking the past average returns and using that percentage return to add it to the future revenues. But that might not always work, right? So that's a constant approach in method when the revenues are increasing by constant margin. But it might not happen for all the companies. It might be the most easiest and silliest way to use. In most of the scenarios, like what happens, we tend to use a simple moving average method, where all the fluctuations in the revenue, if there had been some fluctuations in the revenue, we tend to smoothen it. We tend to use a smoothing method by using a simple moving average. So once we have all those smoothened revenues, we can simply calculate a CAGR, having the most recent revenue at the top divided by the last revenue from which we started our analysis to the power of 1 by n. N is the time period minus 1. So that CAGR percentage we can use to increase it on a percentage basis on the previous revenue that we have. So increasing our X revenue by 1 plus CAGR rate. Though there can be some multiple methods as well. Some people tend to use a volume pricing method. Some people tend to use a log normal method, where they try to again normalize those revenues and use the log function in Excel. You have that percentage increase, taking the average percentage increase over the past years and trying to use a log normal function over that particular average rate. So log normal plus 1 plus the rate and having those future forecasted revenues for that period. Also, in most of the scenarios, we tend to use the average growth rate of that sector, right? Like one popular,
Okay.
if you cannot have that particular metric for that percentage increase in the revenues, use the average rate of that sector, average growth rate of that sector. The simplest and the most popular method being used when there is no revenue guidance. But when you have the revenue guidance, it's very easier to use that particular number because the management would be
Right.
forecasting such increase in revenues, right? We're talking about the
Right.
constant
Right.
method, the smoothing method for the fluctuations in revenue, using the volume price method, a log normal method, or simply the growth rate in sectors. Can be a good one.
Oh, that's really helpful, Mayur, for me and like our audience.
Yeah, I completely understand that. Maybe in future we both can connect once again and try to discuss these topics in great depth, right? So that our
Obviously,
audience can understand these things practically, right? Because it's easier
I
to
I
speak
would
to
love
them.
that.
Correct.
Like there are
Definitely.
many freshers like me who wanna learn all these things, right?
Definitely, Sarthak. Definitely. So my second question to you.
Right.
What do you think are the top skills like which are required for an equity research role as a fresher in the sector?
So Mayura, as I was being a fresher earlier later only, so I have learned few skills which really helped me to get into this career. Is the main thing is the industry analysis. I've learned how to do industry analysis. And what I could add on top of that is the corporate governance analysis, which I have just talked about. That I used to look into the management of the companies, right? Ki how can I see a clean management company? So I'll give you an example of ITC. If you'll see the management of that company, that is very clean, right? The promoters of the company are very much into like they are well qualified, well experienced, and they have been with the company for last 20 to 30 years. This shows the conviction of the management into the company. So these are some points which we used to see in the corporate governance analysis. Another main thing we used to look skill which any fresher can learn is the valuation thing, right? Now valuation is very important. So if you have identified a good stock, but you are not getting that at a good price point, you might not be able to earn a lot of returns out of it, right? So valuing that company must be like that is so important. So we can use two three methods of valuation, like the DCF valuation or the comparable valuation. I'll come into that later. The next skill which you can learn is about the statement analysis, the three statements which every company have: the balance sheet, the P&L, and the cash flow. The analysis and the understanding of all the three statements are very important, as per I'm telling, as per myself, because while giving my few interviews, I have gotten rejected because of this thing only, because I was not able to answer the statements. They have asked me few line items questions which were very difficult for me in the initially. But I would suggest our audience to, they should like read the statements, they should read the annual report, so then they can be well versed with the statements. Coming back to the valuation part, I guess we used to the in the industry we used to use two methods: the DCF valuation and the comparable valuation. So these two skills are very much important. Now I personally also have a question for you on this only. So while doing a DCF valuation, we assume few things, like for we need to have a 5 year like future free cash flows, right? What if our company is showing a negative free cash flow for the last few years? How can we value that company?
Yeah, again, that's a very tricky one, nuance which people face currently as well, involving such companies having negative cash flows closer to the terminal year or like closer to the last year, right? So one thing is that we have to understand is when all that present value of the cash flows, the value that you get, right, is more as compared to the terminal value, right? Because ultimately, what we are assuming that all the healthy cash flows, all the fruitful cash flows should go towards that terminal value, right? But if all the healthy cash flows, the positive cash flows are in the beginning year, and the cash flows become negative at the end of the year, it indicates something is wrong, right? The company might have to go towards dilution. They might have to sell off equity that might lead to further dilution. But how to value such companies? Ideally, what happens in most of the scenarios, people are afraid of discounting those negative cash flows. They say कि negative cash flows है छोड़ दो क्या हो गया, right? But if the negative cash flows are not by a higher margin, right, and you have some great positive cash flows in the beginning year, even discounting those negative cash flows won't make the value of the firm as negative, ideally, right? But please be careful of that discount rate, the cost of capital that we are using to discount those negative cash flows. We tend to assume if we have those negative cash flows, the EV might turn out to be negative. It is not always the case, ideally. Feel free, have the courage and confidence even to discount those negative cash flows by a certain discount rate. But you might have to change that discount rate by taking into consideration the risk in the market, the riskiness of the cash flows. Because you cannot discount just those cash flows just thinking in isolation. You have to read the management commentaries. You have to try to analyze the business, why the cash flows have been negative. Will the cash flows be positive or not? If there is a possibility the cash flows will be positive and it is just a one-time event, the discount rate can be less. But if the business is going towards some sort of bankruptcy or some sort of business बंद हो रहा है, a business अच्छा perform नहीं कर रहा, in that scenario, feel free to use a higher discount rate for those negative cash flows. The second way which people tend to use is they tend to ignore those negative cash flows and just some of the positive cash flows. Because they tend to believe that what will happen if you are just taking into consideration just a few years negative cash flows, but that impacts your valuation. Don't ignore those negative cash flows. Feel free to use those negative cash flows and discount it by higher discount rate or some other kind of discount rate, taking into consideration the risk analysis. If the EV still comes out to be negative, just go for some different method of valuation, right? Because that might help you in that scenario. But don't be afraid to value a firm with negative cash flows. Just use that discount rate.
Right, right.
Hope it helps you.
That is really,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's really great, like connecting with you and having such interactive session, right? So my third question to you is,
Right, right.
yeah, yeah, tell me.
Okay.
Tell me. Okay. So my third question to you is, how do you think, like, what's the importance of networking in this equity research industry?
Okay. So Mer, I'll tell you this. मैं आपको अपना personally बताता हूँ. When I have started my career, I was in my second year only. I've just completed my second year. उसके बाद I need to get into some role, right? पर मैं कहीं पे भी अप्लाई कर रहा था ना, I was not getting any replies to be honest. मैं किसी भी कंपनी में फॉर्म में अप्लाई कर रहा था लिंक्डइन के थ्रू, naukri.com के थ्रू, बट आई वाज नॉट गेटिंग एनी रिप्लाईज, आई वाज नॉट गेटिंग एनी रिस्पॉन्सेज. तो उसके बाद व्हाट हैव डिड इज कि आई हैव स्टार्टेड कोल्ड ईमेलिंग टू पीपल. जिस भी कंपनी में मैं अप्लाई कर रहा था, आई वाज जस्ट सिंपली डूइंग अ लिंक्डइन पे उनको एक मैसेज कर देता था कि आई जस्ट वांट टू वर्क विद योर कंपनी, आई एम नॉट अ ग्रेजुएट राइट नाउ बट स्टिल आई वांट टू वर्क विद योर कंपनी. सो ऐसे ही करके गेट मी रिसर्च के एक सीनियर अकाउंटेंट थे, उन्होंने मेरा मैसेज देखा, तो शी वाज लाइक, उन्होंने मेरे से मेरा रिज्यूमे मांग लिया, एंड शी सेंड माय रिज्यूमे टू द एचआर डिपार्टमेंट ऑफ गेट मी रिसर्च ओनली। सो दैट्स हाउ अब उनको रिज्यूमे मिला, तो दे हैव प्रेफर्ड मी ओवर अदर कैंडिडेट्स और मेरा सिलेक्शन हुआ उसमें। So this is how networking is important. अगर आपके networks में you have so many fund managers, let's say you have so many investment bankers, so they'll help you to get a job, right? उसके बाद अगर मैं आपको अपनी अगली जॉब का एक्सपीरियंस बताऊं इंडिया ब्रिज कैपिटल मैनेजमेंट में, तो आई हैव नॉट अप्लाइड देयर। उसमें जो उनके एमडी थे उन्होंने मुझे डायरेक्ट मैसेज किया खुद से लिंक्डइन पे, राइट? सो बिकॉज ऑफ मैंने क्या किया, अपनी लिंक्डइन पे एक पर्सनल ब्रांड बनाई, राइट? आई वॉज पोस्टिंग डेली, आई वॉज पोस्टिंग माई मॉडल्स, आई वॉज राइटिंग रिपोर्ट्स, आई वॉज राइटिंग कंटेंट ऑन लिंक्डइन। तो वो कहीं ना कहीं वो उनके पास पहुंचा, एंड बिकॉज वो मेरे नेटवर्क में थे इसलिए उनको पता चला वो चीज, और उन्होंने मेरे को हायर करने की सोची, राइट? सो दैट इज हाउ नेटवर्किंग इज इंपॉर्टेंट। इवन अगर एज अ फ्रेशर मैं आपको बताऊं कि करंटली इंडस्ट्री में ज्यादातर आप देखो, मतलब मैंने पर्सनली मैं आपको बता रहा हूँ, बाय साइड है सेल साइड के भी जो भी रोल्स हैं इक्विटी रिसर्च के, वो नॉर्मल Naukri.com या लिंक्डइन पे अवेलेबल नहीं होते, राइट? देर आर नॉट कि डायरेक्ट हायरिंग कहीं पे हो रही है, दे आर लाइक कि जो फंड मैनेजर्स हैं वो हायर कर रहे हैं, अगर आपको उनको आपको काम पसंद आया दे हायर यू, ऐसा होता है। सो वो आपका काम कैसे देख पाएंगे? ओनली वे इज दैट कि यू शुड हैव टू नेटवर्क विद देम, यू शुड हैव टू टॉक विद देम, राइट? इसमें एक ट्रिक मैं आप लोगों को इस वीडियो के इस पॉडकास्ट के थ्रू शेयर करना चाहूंगा, जो मैंने कहीं से सीखी थी, मुझे किसी ने बताई थी, मेरे सीनियर ने, और मेरे को काफी हेल्प मिली थी उसमें। सो इसमें क्या है कि हर कंपनी की कॉन कॉल्स होती है, राइट? तो हर कंपनी की कॉन कॉल्स में ना एनालिस्ट आते हैं, जो भी उनके फंड मैनेजर्स होते हैं, जो भी रिसर्च एनालिस्ट होते हैं वो आते हैं। तो सिंपली आप क्या कर सकते हो, किसी भी कंपनी की कॉन कॉल खोल के उसके एनालिस्ट का नाम कॉपी करके आप गूगल पे सर्च करोगे ना, तो उनकी लिंक्डइन आईडी आ जाएगी। तो आप क्या कर सकते हो, उनकी लिंक्डइन आईडी ओपन कर सकते हो, और नॉर्मली जो भी उन्होंने क्वेश्चन फ्रेम किया था, जो भी उनकी कॉन कॉल में क्वेश्चन था, आप जब उनको कनेक्शन रिक्वेस्ट भेजो, तो उसमें एक चीज जरूर लिखना, एक नोट में जरूर ऐड करना कि जो भी आप जो भी उनका क्वेश्चन था उससे रिलेटेड, कि आपके उस क्वेश्चन से इट रियली हेल्प मी टू अंडरस्टैंड दैट बिजनेस, और वो जो पर्टिकुलर क्वेश्चन था उससे जो भी आपको अंडरस्टैंडिंग मिली वो चीज, तो अगर वो आपका वो क्वेश्चन पढ़ेगा ना, सो डेफिनेटली ही एक्सेप्ट योर रिक्वेस्ट, और वो आपसे कन्वर्सेशन जरूर करेगा, क्योंकि आपने इतना स्पेसिफिक एक वो एक नोट करके उनको भेजा है। तो दैट्स व्हाट आई हैव लर्न फ्रॉम माय सीनियर्स, एंड आई जेन्युइनली वांट टू पास इट टू यू गाइस। सो हाँ, नेटवर्किंग इस टाइम पे एज अ फ्रेशर, अगर मेनली अगर आप अच्छे कॉलेज से भी नहीं हो, लाइक बहुत मतलब 1 to 2% लोग होते हैं जो एसआरसीसी से पास आउट है, हिंदू से पास आउट है, जो आईआईएम से पास आउट है, राइट? अदर देन दैट, अगर किसी के पास स्किल्स है लेकिन अच्छा कॉलेज नहीं है, तो ही शुड हैव एटलीस्ट सम गुड नेटवर्क सो दैट ही कैन गेट अपॉर्चुनिटीज। सो even Mayur, you are in the industry for a very long period of time, you can also like prove this thing that networking is very important in that. Yeah.
Completely agreed that networking, like taking your point, taking all your points, right? So, like great point shared by Sarthak, right? So, trying to build up a good network, and one point that is shared very clearly, and I would urge my audience, right? They can like follow up with this point. ये जो भी कॉन्फ्रेंस कॉल्स है, कॉन कॉल्स है कंपनीज की, राइट? वहाँ पे तो स्टार्ट ट्रैकिंग दोज एनालिस्ट, राइट, दोज पीएम मैनेजर्स, राइट? एंड जो भी वो क्वेश्चंस वहाँ पे पूछ रहे हैं, इट्स अ गुड वे टू ट्राई टू बिल्ड अप अ नेटवर्क विद देम, बिकॉज मोस्ट पीपल तुम्हारी वो
Right.
लिंक्डइन मतलब कि लिंक्डइन रिक्वेस्ट को वो नहीं करेंगे एक्सेप्ट, राइट? बट वंस यू हैव दैट थिंग, लाइक यू सेंड देम इन अ मैसेज हैविंग दैट लिंक्डइन प्रीमियम वर्जन, एंड वहाँ पे तुम क्वेश्चन उनको भेजोगे, सो दैट पर्सन वुड बी क्यूरियस टू नो दैट दिस पर्सन हैज लाइक लिसन टू माय कॉन्फ्रेंस, right? That person knows me, that
Right.
person is interested to know me, उसको मेरे काम में इंटरेस्ट आ रहा है, करेक्ट? एंड जब वो सामने वाला पर्सन देखेगा कि उसको मेरे काम में इंटरेस्ट आ रहा है, तो दैट पर्सन लाइक विल हैव द अर्ज टू टॉक टू यू, कि भाई इस बंदे में ऐसा क्या है, ऐसा
Right.
कि बंदा मुझसे पूछ रहा है इतनी चीजें, मेरी ही क्वेश्चंस उसको लाइक बहुत एडवांटेज दे रहे हैं करियर में, ठीक है? तो क्यों ना मैं इससे एक बार बात करके देखूं कि ऐसा क्या है इसमें, करेक्ट? सो कंप्लीटली
Obviously.
टेकिंग योर पॉइंट्स, वेरी ग्रेट पॉइंट्स आर।
Thank you, Mayur. Mayur, can I just want to ask you one more question on this?
हम्म।
That let's say कि हमें wealth create करनी है, so we need to find some stocks, right? We need to find some undervalued stocks. So, what is your approach of finding such undervalued companies?
See, ideally, what happens, I'm not using any kind of specific approach, right, to find out the undervalued stocks. I believe this undervalued approach or this overvaluation approach, as we tend to talk, that buy the undervalued stock and sell the overvalued stock, these are more applicable in theory, right? Because even if I'm buying an undervalued stock, it might happen that stock is a penny stock. that stock might not be performing well. It might be fundamentally weak, strong. The earnings might not so good. The cash flows might be weak, right? The debt to equity ratio might be too high. The management might not be going towards good expansion activities, right? Or their financial leverage might be too high. The ROCE numbers, ROA numbers might be too less. But still, that stock would be trading at a lower valuation multiple, be it price to earning, be it price to book as compared to its peer. Then why will I still value that undervalued stock? And the same logic goes towards an overvalued stock. If I have an overvalued stock in my portfolio, the stock is highly priced, but that high price is being supported by fundamentals, high cash flows, high earnings, high ROC, ROE, like good management commentary, good expansion activities, having a lower financial leverage. Even if the financial leverage is high, it's justified, right? Till the point of time, your cost of equity is more than cost of debt, right? So if all these scenarios are there, why will I even sell an overvalued stock? I will still hold it and buy even more. But to keep in general, what do I look into? A stock having a lower price to earning ratio, stock having a higher growth rate. The stock should have a higher growth rate in earnings, margins, cash flows in overall. The risk in that stock must be low. Even if the risk is high, I'll still purchase that stock. If the growth rate is high, if the fundamentals are strong and the stock is cheap. But if I can get a stock having a lower amount of risk, in that scenario, is still fine for me. Having a stock with a higher ROE or ROCE. But again, the question can be why the stock will have a higher ROCE or higher ROE. It might even happen the base of that formula might be too low, right? The company might not be investing into such activities, and on account of that, the ROE or the ROCE is low, right? Even that needs to be taken into consideration. But if the company is expanding into great opportunities, expansion activities, and diversification opportunities, it still might happen the ROC of the company might be low because there is a gestation period. It takes 5 to 6 years for the company to deliver that ROCE, right? Even that consideration I will take into consideration. So having a lower PE and a higher growth rate are mandatory for me. The risk might be high or low, right? It doesn't matter to me like till the time the fundamentals are strong. The ROCE preferably should be high, but if it's low, that gestation period should be justified for me, right? So these parameters I tend to take into consideration while buying a stock. So that's my pick on it.
Great, great. That's great because even I have learned something new out of this thing.
Yeah, because we can't work in isolation, right? We have to like look into different
Right,
other
right.
parameters also. Correct.
Uh,
So taking the discussion forward, my next question to
hmm.
you is how to read the annual report and the con calls quickly.
So I'll tell you this thing. So इसके भी दो approach I'll say. If you are a fresher, you are just starting your career, right? You're in your second year, first year, something like that. तो आप अपनी लाइफ की अगर पहली एनुअल रिपोर्ट पढ़ रहे हो तो अगेन आई टेल यू आई हैव लर्न दिस फ्रॉम माय सीनियर्स ओनली. तो उन्होंने मुझे क्या सजेस्ट किया था कि अगर मैं अपनी लाइफ की पहली एनुअल रिपोर्ट पढ़ रहा हूँ आई वुड सजेस्ट कि पहली एनुअल रिपोर्ट को फर्स्ट वर्ड से लेके लास्ट वर्ड तक पूरी पढ़ना. देयर शुड बी नो शॉर्टकट इन दैट. अगर आप अपनी लाइफ की पहली या एक दो एनुअल रिपोर्ट पढ़ रहे हो, टेक एन इजी सेक्टर, टेक मे बी टेक एफएमसीजी सेक्टर, टेक अ रिपोर्ट ऑफ डीमार्ट, एशियन पेंट्स, ऐसा कोई सेक्टर ले लो जो जिसकी आपको अंडरस्टैंडिंग है. डोंट टेक अ सेक्टर लाइक स्पेशलिटी केमिकल या फार्मा जिसको इतने सारे टेक्निकल टर्म्स होंगे, यू विल नॉट एबल टू अंडरस्टैंड द वर्ड्स, राइट? So take a easy sector and start reading an annual report from the first word to the last word. But if you have read few annual reports, right, now you want to analyze any company, so now you're working with any funds, right? So आपके हफ्ते की दो तीन कंपनी एनालाइज करनी है, अगर आपको एक दो कंपनी पढ़नी है तो एनुअल रिपोर्ट अगर आप पूरी पूरी पढ़ोगे दैट वुड टेक लाइक अ वीक ओनली, राइट? सो दैट वुड मेक एनी सेंस. तो उसके लिए वी हैव फ्यू थिंग्स जो एनुअल रिपोर्ट में बहुत मेन होती हैं. सो यू कैन स्टार्ट विद व्हाट डज द कंपनी डू. एनुअल रिपोर्ट में एक होता है अबाउट बिजनेस करके एक ऑप्शन कि जो भी हमारा बिजनेस है वो करता क्या है, राइट? व्हाट वी हैव डिड प्रीवियसली और हम क्या कर रहे हैं, व्हाट इज आवर विजन, व्हाट वी वांट टू डू इन फ्यूचर, राइट? देन अगर आप देखोगे एनुअल रिपोर्ट में नीचे ना डायरेक्टर्स या एमडी का मैसेज होता है, दैट इज वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट, राइट? कि डायरेक्टर एमडी जो भी कंपनी का है वो क्या कह रहा है अपने बिजनेस को लेके, उनका बिजनेस कैसे ग्रो कर रहा है, क्या क्या उनकी नई स्ट्रेटेजीज है जिससे वो ग्रो कर सकते हैं. So these two things you want to look. Later then you should look what are the business risk in that company. क्या जो भी कंपनी, अगर कोई भी कंपनी किसी भी सेक्टर में है, there must be some risk to that, right? Obviously अगर कोई कंपनी इंडस्ट्री में है तो उस पर रिस्क होंगे, right? So we should look into that risk कि क्या क्या रिस्क है और कंपनी उन रिस्क को मिटिगेट करने के लिए कर क्या रही है. राइट, व्हाट आर द स्ट्रेटजीज ऑफ द कंपनीज। देन मैंने आपको जैसे बताया कि मैनेजमेंट कमेंट्रीज काफी हमें मिल सकती हैं इसमें, कि मैनेजमेंट का क्या सोचना है कि फ्यूचर कैसा रहेगा किसी भी कंपनी का, उसके बारे में कंपनी मैनेजमेंट अपनी रिपोर्ट्स में जरूर लिखता है, राइट। अगेन वन मोर पॉइंट आई वुड से कि एक सेक्शन है एमडीएनए, विच इज लाइक, अगर आपने पूरी रिपोर्ट में, आपको बहुत जल्दी से कोई कंपनी के बारे में समझना है तो पूरी रिपोर्ट में कुछ नहीं पढ़ना, तो यू शुड जस्ट रीड द एमडीएनए सेक्शन, राइट। एमडीएनए सेक्शन इज हैव ऑलमोस्ट 80% ऑफ द थिंग्स जो रिपोर्ट में होनी चाहिए, आपको 80% नॉलेज दे देगा। अगर आपको कुछ भी नहीं करना, आप एक कंपनी उठाओ, उसकी पिछले 5 सालों की एमडीएनए रिपोर्ट पढ़ लो, एनुअल रिपोर्ट से। एंड एमडीएनए इज नेवर अ बोरिंग डॉक्यूमेंट। उसका एक एक वर्ड आप देखोगे, इट लाइक समटाइम इट इज ऑफ 2 पेजेस, समटाइम इट इज ऑफ 20 पेजेस, जो 2 to 20 पेजेस का होता है, लेकिन इट इज नॉट अ बोरिंग डॉक्यूमेंट। उसका एक एक वर्ड इज वेरी प्रीशियस। अगर आप कोई इक्विटी रिसर्च रिपोर्ट लिख रहे हो ना, तो आपको एमडीएनए सेक्शन से किसी भी कंपनी के बहुत सारा इंफॉर्मेशन मिलेगा, राइट, कि फ्यूचर प्लान्स क्या है कंपनी के, कंपनी आगे बिजनेस मॉडल क्या है, कंपनी कुछ बिजनेस मॉडल में चेंज कर रही है नहीं कंपनी कर रही, कंपनी ग्रोथ करने के लिए क्या क्या स्ट्रेटजीज यूज करेगी, राइट। उसके बाद अगर थोड़ा सा आप नीचे आओगे ना, तो ऑडिटर्स रिपोर्ट होती है। दैट इज वन ऑफ द मोस्ट इंपॉर्टेंट, वन ऑफ अनदर मेन थिंग जो आप पढ़ सकते हो। रीजन बिन ऑडिटर कुछ सी, इसमें एक ट्रिक है, यू विल नॉट बी परफेक्ट विद इन फ्यू इयर्स, राइट। आई गेस मयूर आप भी बता सकते हो मुझे कि कोई 1 2 3 4 साल के एनुअल रिपोर्ट पढ़ के एक्सपीरियंस के साथ परफेक्ट नहीं होता, राइट। एनुअल रिपोर्ट में से अगर आपको किसी भी कंपनी के लिए रेड फ्लैग्स ढूंढने हैं ना, तो कंपनी ऐसे खुद से नहीं लिख देगी कि हमारी अर्निंग नहीं हो रही है, हमारा बिजनेस गिर रहा है। वो कुछ ना कुछ ऐसे वर्डिंग चेंज करके लिखेगी, और उन सबको समझने के लिए आपको काफी सालों का एक्सपीरियंस चाहिए, राइट। उस चीज के लिए क्या होगा, ऑडिटर्स रिपोर्ट अगर मैं आपको कहूँ, तो कोई भी ऑडिटर डायरेक्ट नहीं लिख देगा उसमें कि इस कंपनी में ये फ्रॉड चल रहा है, ये कर रहा है, पर वो लिखेगा जरूर, बिकॉज दैट इज हिज वर्क। तो वो लिखेगा जरूर, बट ही विल राइट इन सम लैंग्वेज जो आपको शायद इतनी इनिशियली समझ में ना आए, लेकिन आप जितना जितना प्रैक्टिस करोगे, जितना आप चीजें पढ़ोगे, जितना मैनेजमेंट से मीट करके समझोगे चीजें, उतना आपको टाइम टू टाइम आप इम्प्रूव करोगे। तो ऑडिटर रिपोर्ट आप पढ़ सकते हो। देन एट लास्ट जो होता है कि क्विकली समराइज करने के लिए आप जो भी कंपनी के फाइनेंशियल स्टेटमेंट्स हैं, उन सब पे देख सकते हो, प्लस नोट्स टू फाइनेंशियल स्टेटमेंट्स देख सकते हो, ताकि अगर आज में कोई भी, फॉर एग्जांपल अगर आप किसी कंपनी के एक्सपेंसेस देख रहे हो ना, फॉर एग्जांपल कंटेंजेंट लाइबिलिटीज अगर आप किसी कंपनी की देख रहे हो, अगर वो 1 लाख है इस साल, और अगले ही साल वो एक बहुत बड़ा से 1 करोड़ हो गई है, तो आपने देखा बहुत बड़ा जंप है, तो आप नोट्स टू अकाउंट पे जाके देख सकते हो कि इस जंप का क्या रीजन है, इस वेरिएशन का क्या रीजन है, राइट। तो ये करके आप ऐसे करके पूरी एनुअल रिपोर्ट को समराइज कर सकते हो। लेटर देन व्हेन यू कम टू कॉन कॉल्स ना, तो कॉन कॉल्स में द मेजर थिंग इज, आई आई वुड से कि अगर किसी भी कंपनी को एनालाइज करना है, तो पिछले चार जो लास्ट 4 कॉन कॉल्स आएंगी, रीड दोस कॉन कॉल्स फ्रॉम स्टार्टिंग टू एंड। क्योंकि कॉन कॉल्स में, जैसे हमने स्टार्टिंग में बात की, मैनेजमेंट गाइडेंस बहुत देती है, मैनेजमेंट बताती है कि हम अपने बिजनेस को कैसे देख सकते हैं, कितना केपेक्स प्लान कर रहे हैं। तो कॉन कॉल इज ऑल्सो अ वेरी इंटरेस्टिंग डॉक्यूमेंट। और तो कॉन कॉल्स आपको पढ़ने पे पूरा फोकस करना चाहिए। तो दैट्स व्हाट फ्रॉम माय साइड अगर फॉर दिस
Mhm.
क्वेश्चन।
No, completely agree with your point. Starting from slow, starting small, having to read those annual reports, and easy annual reports पढ़ो, छोटी कंपनी के annual reports पढ़ो, then धीरे धीरे just make it big. Because एक दो reports पढ़ने से कुछ समझ नहीं आएगा. Like you have to gain that experience, you have to read multiple reports, and you have to go ahead into this journey, right? So all these parameters, completely agreeing with your points, Arthur. Our audience would be getting
Right.
utmost guidance from these points, I believe.
Mara, so my next question is like, what are the difficulties which you used to face while valuing any private equity?
Private equity firm is very challenging because the first challenge that we face is their earnings are not publicly available for most of the firms. You might not get your P&L, balance sheet, cash flow statements, and you don't know that what exactly is happening. And these companies, before coming up in the market, they tend to talk about higher valuations, higher price to earning multiples, higher price to book value multiples on the basis of what, right? So it's a huge difficulty in valuing such companies. One such difficulty, what happens is it's different. It's very difficult to bifurcate or differentiate between the salaries of employees and the dividend, like which the company gives. Because even the founder of the company is working in the same company, correct? So that is one thing that happens. The key person has a great value. The person like who might be associated with that company has a key person value, right? The kind of investments into those companies are illiquid. They might have a higher illiquidity discount, right? And also the buyer and seller is not completely diversified. It's very difficult to value such companies. So what do we do ideally for such companies? We tend to calculate a total beta, right? We tend to go towards a total beta strategy. So what ideally we tend to do, we take the average unlevered beta of similar companies in the same industry. So for example, if an IT company wants to get listed, so I will be taking an average unlevered beta of the listed IT companies and dividing that average unlevered beta by the correlation of that with the market. So once I have that average unlevered beta dividing by the correlation with the market, I will tend to get that total beta. And that total beta is very essentially used in valuing such companies because you have to use that beta to calculate the cost of equity, right? So that is all for that unlisted private companies. But the analysts who are trying to target these companies, they get this information of financial statements internally through the management of the company. A person who is a layman, like who might be just tracking the markets, might not be able to get such insider information. But a person who is tracking those analysts, they try to talk with the management of the company, they get on call, they go to that company and try to analyze those results and get those numbers, right? And then they try to forecast. The forecasting remains the same by creating a financial model, but the major difference is having that total beta instead of market beta. Total beta being used for private companies and market beta is something that we're using for a public listed companies. And when the company goes towards an IPO, the company gets listed, then that total beta is converted to market beta, right? Because ultimately that company gets listed. So the having that unlevered beta and dividing it by the correlation with the market is very important. So that's something I believe is crucial, right? So without wasting any time, I'll just post in my last question to you.
Right.
Okay. How to enhance your
Okay.
skills? How to enhance your skills in this field?
Okay. I'll just give you one simple thing. Key. Let's take a time period of 12 months, right? You are in a second year, maybe in the first year, right? Let's take a time period of 12 months. अब इसमें क्या करो? Take one sector every month, right? Take one sector every month. उसमें take any four companies in that month, right? So per company per week of same sector. So by
Correct.
the time एक साल कंप्लीट होगा, आपके 12 सेक्टर्स कवर हो जाएंगे एंड यू विल बी लाइक विद 48 कंपनीज आपकी कवर हो जाएंगी. हर वीक उस एक कंपनी का एक सेक्टर का प्रॉपर एनुअल रिपोर्ट पढ़ो, कॉन कॉल्स पढ़ो, जैसे मैंने आपको बताया कैसे पढ़नी है, वो कॉन कॉल्स पढ़ो, एनुअल रिपोर्ट पढ़ो. फिर सिंपली अपना क्या करो, उस पे थोड़ा सा अपना पर्सनल एनालिसिस स्टार्ट करो. जो भी आपको हमने पॉइंट्स बताए, और यू कैन रेफर टू एनी कोर्सेज ऑफ फाइनेंशियल मॉडलिंग, वैल्यूएशन, इक्विटी रिसर्च. उसमें आपको और पता चलेगा कि आपको कैसे एनालाइज करना है, राइट? जो भी हमने पॉइंट्स बताया, आपको ओवरव्यू दिया है, उन पॉइंट्स को आपको एनालिसिस करना है. अब हर हफ्ते आपने एक कंपनी लेनी है. उस एक कंपनी को जो भी आपने एनालिसिस किया, जो भी आपको समझ आई है उसकी कि क्या ग्रोथ हो सकती है, क्या फ्यूचर हो सकता है, कैसे वो कंपनी की स्ट्रेटेजीज है, क्या रिस्क है, उसको एक अपने वर्ड डॉक्यूमेंट में लिखो. आप क्या करोगे, जो पहली कंपनी आपने चुनी है जो फर्स्ट वीक में, उससे आप हर 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 जो फर्स्ट कंपनी और जो फोर्थ कंपनी है उसको कंपेयर करो. आपको खुद दिखेगा कितना डिफरेंस आ रहा है आपके खुद के एनालिसिस में, कि आप क्या क्या रेड फ्लैग्स पकड़ पा रहे हो किसी कंपनी में, कितना आप एनालिसिस कर पा रहे हो. बाय द टाइम यू विल एंड अप डूइंग दिस फॉर द फॉर द 12 सेक्टर्स, आपने काफी ज्यादा नॉलेज भी गेन कर ली होगी बिफोर इवन स्टार्टिंग टू एनी करियर. आपका करियर स्टार्ट होने से पहले ही आपके पास इतनी नॉलेज है जो शायद किसी के पास 1-2 साल, 3 साल, 4 साल काम करने के बाद भी नहीं होगी, क्योंकि आपने टाइम दिया, अपना एफर्ट्स लगाया, राइट? बट दिस थिंग नीड, लाइक इन दिस करियर, एक चीज बहुत मतलब याद रखनी है कि रीडिंग इज द ओनली थिंग, right? You have to read, right? You have to make a habit of reading at least few pages in a day, whether it could be an annual report, whether it could be books, it could be any kind of documents. You should know how to read, right? So yeah, आप ये वाला framework use कर सकते हो to enhance your skills in this career.
Agreeing with your point, completely agreeing with the point. I really believe the audience would be
So yeah,
following this.
Mayur, so my last question to you is right. So I'll ask you my last question. So there are so many courses of financial modeling and valuation. Let's say someone have did a course in financial modeling and valuation. What are the career options for him after that?
See, if someone is doing courses in financial modeling and valuation, so ultimately the thing is there are multiple career options, right? Someone can go towards a buy side research, like they can go towards a core equity research profiles, right? They can go towards an equity research profiles, going towards financial modeling valuation roles, right? Now, these roles might be by different terms in different companies, right? Some people tend to market such roles as equity research profiles. Some people tend to market such roles as a valuation analyst, right? Some people tend to market it as a financial modeling expert, right? But all the people are doing the same role ideally. They're trying to prepare those financial models, trying to forecast the company, having those price to earning, price to book value multiples, for example, and like giving those commentaries upon the valuations of the company, right? So such roles can be really great for a person starting his journey into. It doesn't matter like whether you are starting from a boutique firm, a tier two, tier one firm, or a firm like JP Morgan or Morgan Stanley. It's completely fine to gain some experience and get into some bigger ideas, some bigger firms, some bigger work at a later point of time. The more roles can be related to portfolio management. So ideally, you won't be getting a portfolio management role straightforwardly, right? To manage the client's money and to take those long and short positions, buying and selling those stocks. But once you gain some experience into these research profiles, right? At that point of time, after gaining some 5 to 6 years of work experience, you might get a role as a portfolio manager into some boutique firms, into some Indian firms. The multinational firms, ideally, they demand an experience of at least 10 years, right? But the research role being a stepping stone, so having to get some kind of experience into those roles and shifting into portfolio management can be a good way as well. Some people also land into a role like which is called as an investment specialist, right? So now investment specialist again is a person who works as a global strategist, right? He's trying to track the global markets, any market, US, UK, China, Japan, India, and trying to guide the research team, trying to guide the portfolio managers upon the bets to take in the market, be it strategical or tactical, right? Like whether to buy the US markets or sell the Indian markets, whether to buy the Chinese markets being undervalued and why, right? Which stocks to buy, which stocks like is in his radar. It tries to track those inflation numbers, the growth numbers, interest rate numbers, PMI numbers, everything from the global perspective, and tends to suggest and recommend through his work to the equity research team or the PMs. So he's a person who is who's a guiding factor, like who's talking to clients as well, who's preparing all those presentations and decks to talk with the clients as well. So that is one such thing. And not barring yourself towards equity, a person can expand his horizon and go towards a fixed income research role or an alternative role. And combining all these roles, like you tend to find someone into a multi-asset specialist role, like a person is good into equities, fixed income, and alts, who's trying to track the global markets and suggesting the different teams of the different opinions that he has. Right. So various career options can be there. Like if a person wants to, if a person has done these curriculums of financial modeling and valuation, and which can help him to succeed in this competitive and dynamic market. ये मेरा मानना है. Right.
That's great. That's great, man.
Yeah. So I complete. We are hard stop on time, and we'll try to keep this session short so that our audience really enjoy it. And of course, we can have one promise to our audience that we can come back, maybe offline sometime, and we can guide upon these
Obviously.
topics practically, how we are preparing those models on Excel, how we are forecasting these numbers, because it's much easier to say than to do, right? So all these
Right,
things
right.
can come together in
But
future. Yeah. So like, what's your view, Sarthak, on this?
like I personally, I'm saying, first of all, thank you for inviting me in this podcast. I learned really new things from you also, and I really enjoyed the experience here. And if anyone for our audience, उनका कोई भी question है, they can write in the comment section. We'll be answering that questions. And हमारे LinkedIn profiles पे they can ask us any questions if they have, right? And
Correct, correct.
till then, keep learning, keep growing. That's what I think.
Correct. I know guys can follow us on our social media platforms on LinkedIn and YouTube, and we are more than happy to help you out for any queries in valuations or finance in general. So thank you all. Stay tuned, and thank you, Sarthak.
Thank you, man. Thank you.